Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we've got another video that answers a question that a viewer like you had and left in the comment section. Sometimes we answer these in question videos where we group a bunch together, but with today's video we're just going to do the whole 5-minute shebang answering this question because I think it's an important enough aspect about this ship and battleships in general that it deserves its own video. The question is for an explanation of the Citadel. What is a Citadel on a battleship? What does that mean? So we're going to spend a couple minutes today talking about the generic armor on battleships, not necessarily specific to the Iowas. So, you're designing a battleship. You start with an armored box. That armored box is the Citadel. You want your Citadel to be as small as possible to save weight. You've only got a limited amount of resources and money to spend on this project, and potentially you've got weight limits because of international treaties. Whatever the case, there are some restrictions imposed on you as the designer. So you've got to make the Citadel as small as possible. On the other hand, you have to make the Citadel as large as possible because you want as much reserve of buoyancy as you can get. You cannot armor the whole ship. There just isn't enough weight and money in the world to make a ship with a 14-inch belt all the way around. So, what you armor is everything from your forwardmost gun turret, covering your engineering spaces, back to your aftermost gun turret. All the important stuff has to fit between your gun turrets, or in some rare cases where ships have their gun turrets all grouped forward, you would fit it between your gun turrets and your engineering spaces. And so things forward of your gun turrets tend to be unarmored, and with one exception we'll cover later, things aft of your gun turrets tend to also be unarmored. So, your important stuff fits between the gun turrets. That is your engineering, all of your magazines, on American battleships, internal communications, although German battleships seem to not find that important. Some of your radio equipment, medical spaces on American battleships, some damage control facilities, all of that stuff fits between those turrets. So you've got sidewalls on. That is your armored belt. You've got walls at the front and back of the ship. Those are your armored bulkheads. They don't need to be as thick as your belt because a shell hitting the bulkhead is going to have to punch through either the nose or the tail of your ship. And if it's going through other plating and void spaces, then the odds of it impacting that armor at full force is reduced. Your box needs a bottom. Most battleships have at least a double bottom. Iowa-class battleships have a triple bottom. And your box needs a roof. That's the armored deck, which is what we're standing next to right here. In many cases, most battleships have a solid piece of armor for their belts, their bulkheads, their decks, etc. My rough rule of thumb is 1 inch of armor will stop 1 inch of projectile. So if you're building a battleship with 14-inch guns, you would want an armored belt that's about 14 inches thick. On Iowa-class battleships and many treaty-era battleships, they didn't have enough weight to spend on armor plate like that, and especially as your main caliber guns get thicker, get larger, it's hard to make the armor thicker. And so they do a layered system. And so Iowas have 1.5 inches of shell plating and then several void spaces and then a 12-inch belt, and the belt is angled. So the angle gives it greater equivalent thickness. Older types of battleships tend to just have a solid external belt that is fairly straight up and down. Not so with the Iowas and some other late era battleships. Now, there are some very important things that you just cannot fit inside of your Citadel. Where you're driving the ship from has to be up where you can see. Your guns themselves are not down in the Citadel, they're up on deck. For things like this, they get separate armored columns. So for the gun turrets, those are armored barbettes that stick up through the armored deck, and they have an armored gun turret on top. The conning tower is similar. There is an armored wiring trunk that comes up from the Citadel and terminates in the actual conning tower space. Likewise, your armored Citadel usually does not cover your steering gear at the aft end of the ship. And so this is often encased in a separate armored box. Sometimes there is very little armor between the end of the Citadel, that aft bulkhead, and this separate armored box for your steering gear. Sometimes, like with the Iowas, to increase the amount of area covered by the Citadel to give you more reserve of buoyancy, some additional spaces in between are covered by that armored box. In our case, all of our refrigerators are in that. Not because it's a critical system, but because it's got a lot of internal volume. That means if we start taking hits below the waterline, that starts to punch through some of our layers and flood, it's not going to overcome the ship's reserve of buoyancy and cause us to sink. In fact, it leaves us enough reserve of buoyancy that we can even counter flood to keep the ship on an even keel. Fire control systems tend to be the same way, in that they have an armored wiring trunk coming up from the Citadel and terminating in a relatively lightly armored fire control system, a rangefinder. Because these rangefinders need to be as high as possible to get the best range, it's not possible to put all that much weight up in the superstructure. Thanks for watching. If you have questions about the Citadel or anything else, drop them in the comments section. We try to get back to you written as soon as we can, and we try to create videos, whether it's a compilation of questions or standalones like this one. Check the description down below for ways you can support us. There's a link to a GoFundMe campaign which supports the museum, but specifically this YouTube channel. The museum also receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. We put out new content several times a week, and if you do that, you might get some notifications saying that there's new videos out there. Thanks for watching.